I think most of us are in now. Thank you for joining for today's webinar of the Living with Fire PyroLife webinar series. Today's topic is the perspectives from the United States, and we have three great speakers joining us to talk about wildfire management in the United States. Before I introduce our three speakers, I would like to quickly cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will share a link of the webinar video after the webinar, and you can also find it on the PyroLife website and the PyroLife YouTube channel. Also, every webinar of this webinar series, we have one early stage researcher from PyroLife writing a summary article of the contents of the webinar. And for this one, Pooja Pandeji will be writing the summary blog, and that will also be shared with you and will be available on the PyroLife website. We invite all of your comments and questions throughout the webinar. So please find the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window and put in any question or comments you have throughout the presentations. Because we have three speakers today, we will wait for all three presentations and then take some questions at the end. And in case we don't get to all the questions that are being asked, we will ask the presenters to make some time to write some answers and share them with you later. So I will now pass it on to Bethany, who has helped organize this webinar, to introduce the speakers today.
Hello, everyone. I am very excited to share with you the three speakers. I was able to help coordinate. These are phenomenal people with a just amazing breadth of experience in wild and fire management in the United States, all the way from national level to the local level. So to start the webinar today, we have Shauna Lagarza. Shauna recently retired as the National Director of Fire and Aviation for the U.S. Forest Service, having spent 31 years with the federal government in fire and aviation. She's currently the Director of Emergency Management in La Plata County in Colorado, which is in the Rocky Mountain region. Prior to her position in Washington, D.C., she was the Regional Fire and Aviation Director for the Forest Service in California. That's where I met her. In addition to her fire experience, she has worked at the World Trade Center 9/11 recovery efforts, hurricanes, tornadoes, other all-risk incidents. She's also traveled internationally to recent fires in Australia, Brazil, and Mexico. She has a doctorate in psychology and a master and bachelor's of science. In addition, we have Sam Marouk, who recently retired as the Bureau of Land Management, California State Fire Management Officer. The Bureau of Land Management is part of the Department of Interior. Sam has spent 30 years in wild and fire management with both the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management. In that position, Sam managed, directed, and provided top-level leadership to the statewide fire and aviation management program, telecommunications program, fire prevention and mitigation education programs, and also fire preparedness, suppression, and post-suppression activities throughout the state. He has spent many years as a member of FireScope on the board of directors, a member of the California Wildland Fire Coordination Group, and a member of the National Fire Leadership Team. He has provided oversight and consultation and authoritative expert guidance to all 11 California incident management teams during fire seasons throughout the US. He also just returned from a fire assignment with a team as planning ops, I believe. And finally, we will have Sasha Berleman, who is the director of Fire Forward at a nonprofit nature conservation organization called Audubon Canyon Ranch in the North Bay area of California. Sasha is working to lead a change in the way we live with fire in the Bay Area. With her team, Sasha plans and organizes cooperative controlled burns and leads community efforts around fire management. Sasha earned her doctorate in wildland fire science from the University of California at Berkeley. focusing on prescribed fire use for restoration of ecosystem health. She's leading some really innovative programs in the North Bay area, and has also worked on hotshot crews and as a fire practitioner as well. So I'm looking forward to their presentations. It's just a great opportunity to ask questions about how emergency management and wildland fire management in the US happens. So without any further delay, I will hand this off to Shauna, and thank you so much, all three of you, for being here.
Great, thanks, Bethany, and hello to everybody out there on Zoom land. I'm Shauna Legarza, as Bethany said. Happy to be here today. I'm going to share my screen with a small PowerPoint that we work through, and I'll speak for probably about, I don't know, 10 to 12 minutes, and then I'll be handing it over to my cohort, Sam Marouk. So I spent my entire career working in fire and aviation management, and started when I was 18, and I just retired actually 1 year ago today. And I took a job here in Durango, Colorado in emergency management, and there's been an amazing overlap of what I'm doing now in emergency management to help support when fires start on the landscape, right? And so all the experience that has primarily been a first responder. I was on an engine, I was on a helitack, I was a hotshot crew member and a superintendent for almost 20 years of my career. So I got to travel all across the country and to other countries, helping with wildland fire management across the landscapes on all different jurisdictions, federal, state, local, private, and tribal. And I think one of the things that was most important when I became the National Fire Director, that was in 2016, was really looking across boundaries and trying to tie in all the loose ends and authorities and laws to be able to try to do more cohesive fire management on the landscape. And that's super challenging because all the different jurisdictions and agencies have different authorities that they go by. So coordinating that at the national level all across the country was super rewarding, super challenging. And we would always talk about cross-boundary projects. Fire knows no boundaries on the land. It doesn't know where the private land ends and the forest begins, or the rangeland. And so how do we work across all of the United States of America here, from the Pacific Northwest, where Bethany is at up there, down into California, all over into the southern area of the United States of America, in managing wildland fire projects and having more prescribed burns, controlled burns, managed fires, and places where you have to immediately put the fire out. When I worked in Southern California, you can see on your screen down here, I was the Chief Forest Fire Management Officer on the San Bernardino National Forest. And down in that country, there is so much wildland urban interface and threat to infrastructure that it was full-on fire suppression in that area. We couldn't afford to manage much fire and landscape there just because of the people, the infrastructure coming into Southern California, and the smoke that happens into the populated area of Southern California. We did, however, work on trying to get some small prescribed burn units into those areas too, and talk about how we need to be able to live with fire on the landscape. And if we do more prescribed burning, controlled burning, be able to live with the smoke for a couple of days, then that's going to help prevent something into the future. A lot of my career is spent here in the Great Basin. That's a lot of the Bureau of Land Management land. That's your sagebrush and your grasses, big fires that burn across the landscape, 100, 200,000 acres in that area, that has consequences on private lands, cattle ranches, and sheep ranches in some of that country. And so the cohesive fire management is different wherever you go. And what we're seeing now is a lot of the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, unprecedented temperatures, due to the warming of the world up in those areas, and significant fire increases in a lot of large large fires last year in 2020. So the United States of America has a very dramatic and different landscapes from the southern United States here over by Florida in the southern area, on the right-hand side of your screen, all the way up to Alaska, where I too worked on a hotshot crew up in Alaska. So it's a long-term challenge that we have in the United States of America to do cohesive fire management. So then when we were fire management, we talked, well, how do we do that? So the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy was probably came about in 2002. That was my first year as a superintendent on the San Juan hotshots here in Durango, Colorado. It was a very intensive fire year. I can remember being early on in June with big fires across the Rocky Mountain regions and high preparedness level of 4. One of the only other times that we reached that preparedness level from 1 to 5 in the United States, with 5 being the highest that we were in 4. And so folks back in Washington, D.C. at that time, with all their interagency partners, federal, state, private, local, came together and they built the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, because we knew that we couldn't do it just alone in the federal programs. And so whenever you roll out a program at the national level, it's hard to describe the scale and scope of what we need to do for our future generations while protecting the current generations. And so on the screen here, some of the most important things they put together then, the early 2000s, like 2004, somewhere in there, which we still carry forward today in the federal agencies. And even in my job at local government now as a director of emergency management, I advocate and talk about restore and maintain our landscapes that we have to the people in local government where I work now. And what does that look like? And how do we go about doing that? Because like I said on the earlier screen up here, restoring the landscapes across the United States of America is dramatically different from the southern to the northern Rocky to the southwest. So how do we continue to educate our communities on what that looks like and what will it take to do? And that's all sorts of things, from mechanical to prescribed burning to managed fire, to put some fires out if you can't have them because of the infrastructure threatening, and then developing a strategy for maintaining those over time. And so a lot of things that we worked with in my past life, I call it, my past job, creating fire adapted communities and really working with folks in the community, and especially now at my local level, we have different types of programs and organizations that talk about what is a fire adapted community and what does it look like. And it's going to be almost like an ultra marathon on the public awareness and education for creating fire adapted communities, because it's hard for people to understand why we're having these big fires on the landscapes of the United States of America. And there's so many things that play into these big fires. And how do we create communities where we can take advantage of fire on the landscape and have the community be understanding and aware of that? For an example, in 2011, I was a division chief here in Durango, Colorado, and we had a project called Animas City Mountain that was on federal land right adjacent to the city of Durango. And it had 10 years to be able to do any work on this beautiful piece of land. It's about, 40 acres right next to our small community of Durango. And people were super concerned about what it would look like afterward. How would we burn the piles? What if the fire escaped? What about smoke in the town? And so we worked really hard with them, and between 2009 and 2011 to be able to start the first introduction of reducing some of the fuel loading in that area. Right. And we were successful in doing that. And then now in my local government position, I'm working with the federal government and with the community, talking about how we need to adapt to having fire that's in our community and managing that fire, so that when our grandkids want to hike this beautiful mountain and see the San Juans, that they can come through a landscape that is safe for them, it's well maintained, and it's a healthy national forest. And so that takes a lot to be able to socialize that and have the right information out, and then really, listen to the people that have some concerns on that. So a lot of public awareness for fire adapted communities. The third one was effective and efficient wildland fire response, improving your fire response. So it was efficient and effective fire response. And when I come back up to this map here, the United States of America, where you see these little orange dots by Northern California, Great Basin, Rocky Mountain, there's large dispatching of resource centers that are located in those dotted areas, with the main mobilization center being here in the, where it says Great Basin. See that in the green? So it's a National Interagency Fire Center. And so we knew when we put this national cohesive strategy together that we needed to be more efficient and effective in how we responded to fires, just locally, like in Southern California, but what if we had a big fire burning over on the eastern part of the country? And so we worked immensely to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our response to wildland fire and movement of people. And so what came out of those discussions, which was called the National Fire Plan, right? So it came from after, right around the same time as right either before the cohesive strategy, right in that time frame, the National Fire Plan realized probably right after the fires of 2000. Yep, there it is. I remember I was working in Alaska and I came down to the United States, a lower 48, we say, right? When you work in Alaska, it was a remarkable fire season in 2000. It was one of the first years we can remember seeing multiple fires over 100,000 acres. And so the National Fire Plan came in to address 5 key point areas, was firefighting, rehabilitation, hazardous fuels reduction, community assistance, and accountability. A lot of new hotshot crews, the 20-person folks were built off the National Fire Plan. That's when I became the superintendent of the San Juan Hotshots, was from the National Fire Plan, and to bolster the firefighting resources across the nation. One of the areas where we still have a lot of work to do, hazard fuels reduction. You know, we're super far behind here in the United States of America on the hazard fuel reduction, as we are in other parts of the world. I've seen that all across my times when I was National Fire Director, traveling to different parts of the world. And so it's a global problem, and it definitely takes that cohesive fire management and thinking to work toward that. So my last slide that I'll share with you here, community assistance. So this slide is a really important slide, I believe, now and into the future. And it comes from work that's been done by Headwaters Economics. And it brings together all sorts of challenges and thoughts for how we develop communities into the future. Because it's not just a federal fire problem or state fire problem or private fire problem, but it's a community awareness of how we develop communities into the future. What's our land use in our building codes look like at the local government level? What do we use for different types of construction? How do we have home defense? And how do we have different open areas for people to be safe and live with fire that is in this area, right? So I've been talking about a lot of this. I'm down here in the right-hand corner now, local governments, right? So that's where I'm at now. When I was at the national office, we looked at all these types of things that were in there for watershed management, forest management products, and how we manage fire in the landscape. How do we get more resources to be able to do prescribed burning and different things? So it comes all the way back to this cohesive fire management. It can't just be one agency or one group of people or one country. I believe that it needs to be a global approach to how do we share ideas and topics and different things to have a landscape that's more adapted and resilient for our children's grandchildren, right? And so that is my last slide. I'm going to hand it over to my good friend, Sam Maruk. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Shauna, for sharing these slides. It was a good reminder of what we're all up against in all our communities. So my career, as was Bethany had shared, 30 years of wildland fire management. Started with the U.S. Forest Service on a hotshot crew, as Shauna did, and spent quite a lot of time suppressing fires. until I started realizing that there was a bigger need out there for me. The great thing about being on Hot Shot Crew is you get to study fire, you get to study the effects of fire, environmental effects, how it affects communities, et cetera. And it was important to me to be a part of the solution and not necessarily the response. So I spent the mid third of my career in fuels management at the local and then the state level for the Forest Service, and a lot of that effort was frustrating from a federal standpoint because of the regulations in the state that cause a little bit of angst in how we implement some of the fuels management planning we have. So let me back up a little bit. So in California, there's 5 federal land management stewardship agencies, 2 state response, and I'm going to call pre-suppression interests. So CAL FIRE is a very large fire organization in California that has responsibility for state lands. And then we have 1,100 local government fire departments that have pre-suppression or suppression responsibilities at the local level. And one other state agency that oversees or helps collaborate with those folks. So in California, it's a diverse state. And Shauna did a really good job of painting a picture of California. In Southern California, flashy fuels, generally speaking, a large complex area of urban interface. So a lot of people like California or Southern California, so they live there. And there's a lot, not only do they live there, but they recreate and they use our lands for to get out of the house and explore. So there's a lot of humans running around Southern California. And as you work up your way up the state, you'll see a big gray area there. That's a concentration of population. And then in San Francisco, the Bay Area, you'll see an even denser population center. So surrounding all of that is a mix between brush, grasses, and timber. The gray is really more grassland, agriculture area. And in Northern California is generally timber type. Currently, because of the drought, there's everything's really dry tinder, no matter what shape and form it takes. And so we've as all the land stewards have collaborated on as much as we can to prepare communities at risk for fire. We learned a lot of lessons on the past few years on large-scale fires affecting large-scale communities, such as Redding, California, and the Carr Fire, a devastating fire that came through the northern end of Redding. Thank you, Shauna. And really affected the community at large. Not only from getting out of the fire's way while the event happened, but the aftermath of coming back and not necessarily having homes left or ranch land to raise cattle on, et cetera. Several years ago, same thing happened in Southern California. 2003, multiple large fires from lightning events. Same effects to the San Diego area, the eastern Los Angeles area, really opened everybody's eyes. And so as Shauna referenced, National Fire Plan and the cohesive strategy really struck a chord with us managers throughout the state and how our responsibility is to protect the public and help the public understand their roles in helping out. And so I say all this because as I learned through my fuels management career, it was more important for me then to help the public understand their roles in the community response. We really can't do it all by ourselves. The fire folks, us land managers, can't prepare communities, as Shauna reflected on, at a wholesale way, partly because of, well, taxes at the end of the day. Funding and taxes and a realization that fuels grow back and there needs to be a maintenance plan on everything we do. So we're working really hard on enlisting the public to help us. Currently, it's a bit of an uphill climb, but it's something that I find that is the public's wrapping their arms around now, mostly because of the impacts they've seen through these large-scale events that I was speaking about earlier. A lot of the efforts are very collaborative. So the federal, state, and local governments are putting on workshops. There's fire safe councils in which a lot of the interested parties, do a lot of the work on the planning side of things. The funny thing about California is because of the population densities, prescribed fire is very difficult to achieve because of the smoke impacts to all the communities. The way California is built, and geographically, a lot of the smoke filters into the the gray areas on the side you see here. Those are basically the deep ends of the pools that all the smoke filters into. So we've come up with other strategies in trying to reduce fuels, but because of the topography, it's difficult to get a lot of those fuels. And then you have environmental factors such as bug infestations and whatnot that are really speeding up the amount of dead and dry fuels that are on the ground. So we're challenged. The public recognizes this, and that's why there's a higher interest in trying to do what we can to prepare communities to receive fire. I think Sasha is going to speak to the local government or the local response to the environment, the new environment we're working through. But I invite everybody to think and share your ideas of how best we can work together with the public at large in community stewardship. I'll turn it over to Sasha for the next slide. Thank you, everybody.
Good morning, folks. I'll set up my screen share here. All right, great. So yeah, I'm joining from the Bay Area, which is one of those gray zones on the map that Sam showed. And we're dealing with some seriously catastrophic fires in recent years in this area. And as Sam was mentioning, we have incredibly dense population in the Bay Area. Everyone seems to want to live in California, but even more so, people really love living in the Bay Area. And that's been true for thousands of years. We've had the most dense populations of all of California in the Bay Area for thousands of years. I'd like to just kind of set that framework, take a look at this map, and we have these kind of language zones that are the parts in italics, but each of those orange blocks is a separate local tribe that's native to the Bay Area and goes back thousands of years, stewarding this landscape for its many resources, using fire predominantly as that tool for doing so. So fire's been around here for a very long time, not just through lightning, but also through people, and in many cases, especially in the Bay Area, predominantly through people using fire, not through lightning. And what that's resulted in, and you may have to move your little window of talking heads here, is a series of ecosystems in this region that are highly fire dependent in order to thrive and stay in balance and be resilient against all sorts of stressors and triggers. This is not just true of the Bay Area. We have fire-dependent ecosystems really across North America, but I'm just going to kind of focus on ones that exist in my area and focus this talk on what we're doing here and what we're facing here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area of California. So here you see the median fire return intervals of our ecosystems, and they're in years. So our oak woodlands, really the median fire return interval is around 2 years, can go as high as 8 to 11 years. We've got our grasslands, which should be burning every 3-ish years. And then even our forests in this area are adapted to frequent fire as soon as 10 years. And when I've actually looked at more local scientific literature for redwood forests, our local redwood forests here in the San Francisco Bay Area are adapted to, or have a fire history of burning every 4 years on the median in terms of how frequently fire should be burning. And it's not just how frequently fire should be burning in these ecosystems, but also the type of fire that shows up, which is really important because it's this, like, these big wildfires happening in extreme weather conditions are often cases, because these areas haven't seen fire in a long time, are burning at a much higher severity or intensity than these systems can support. And so they're not necessarily adding to resilience because we've been removing fire for so long. I want to talk a little bit about just a couple cases of the reasons that we use fire on the landscape. There are so many different ones and so many different ecosystems that need different types of fire applied to them in order to thrive, but just a couple that we are dealing with here. One is grasslands. Our grasslands in California, we have this mental image in the greater public that our grasslands are meant to look like these golden, dry hillsides of dead grass in the summers, the Golden Hills. And that's actually not native to this area. Those are grasses that come from Europe. And they crowd out our wildflower blooms. They use up the water and they block out the sunlight so that they germinate really quickly and come up really fast. So we use fire to remove that non-native grass thatch, annual grass thatch, and allow the wildflowers to come back and the native perennial bunch grasses that stay green all year to have a little space to grow. We also really critically need to be using fire on a frequent basis in our oak woodlands. Our oak woodlands are one of our most diverse and valuable habitats in terms of food and habitat. And so they need fire every 3 to 10 years. And if you remove fire from these systems, they get out of balance and we end up with way too many Douglas firs or way too many bay laurels, other trees that are encroaching these oak woodlands and basically creating a habitat that those oaks can no longer survive. So we're removing those encroached Douglas firs, pile burning them, or those encroaching trees, burning them in piles, and then restoring broadcast burning to those systems. And this is also supporting acorn protection and production because there's a native pest called the acorn weevil that can decimate acorn crops, which means no more acorn trees for the future and no food for all the wildlife and people who use those acorns. And so broadcast burning also protects acorns. Another habitat we have here that is completely wiped out when we remove the disturbance, particularly fire, is coastal prairie. So just one example, one of the properties we're working on here in the Bay Area in 1952 had 216 acres of coastal prairie, and in 2019 it had 18 acres left of coastal prairie. And that's just from removing disturbance from the landscape very quickly. Our other native species just kind of grow back in. Our coyote brush and Douglas firs take back over that habitat and it quickly disappears. And this is a huge problem because coastal prairie is the most diverse habitat of all the grasslands in North America. It provides very specific ecosystem services that cannot be replaced by any other grassland. So, and we only have 5% of it left, largely due to development, but also due to removal of disturbance from the landscape. And so I'm the director of a program called Fire Forward, and we're basically trying to see what we can do to change the way people live with fire in this region. So we're trying out some new things, and that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this short presentation here. So we were developed in 2017. I'm the founder, so I started this program in 2017 with the intent of basically identifying hurdles to use of prescribed fire and creating solutions to those hurdles. Because if we're going to live with fire, we need to actually live with fire, and our ecosystems require fire to thrive. People here have required fire to thrive for thousands of years. And so we need to be putting people in a positive place with fire, educating them about it and its role, teaching them how to use it in order to basically just change, like flip the entire dialogue around humans' relationship with fire on the landscape. So we're trying to organize community around prescribed burning, trying to develop capacity for that prescribed burning work, and then we're trying to actually just get more implementation on the ground. And this is a feedback loop, so we're building on that all of the time. And initially, that really in our region, because we don't have any actual agencies that had prescribed fire skills or burning skills, so we were starting from scratch. We didn't have the gear and equipment in this region to do prescribed burning, and we didn't have people trained in wildland fire or prescribed burning. And so we started offering trainings and we started developing an equipment cache. And then we started planning and organizing cooperative prescribed burns. So initially those were pretty small and very agency heavy. Basically, you know, CAL FIRE, which is the state agency, would come out and just dominate the prescribed burn that we had spent a year and a half planning, because they were very, very scared and wanted to keep it within their own wheelhouse. But over time, as we've trained people in wildland fire in this region, really built a robust gear cache and brought people out and gotten people familiar with fire on the ground, we've been able to really shift into showing people and then getting people themselves burning. And these are folks coming from around this community who have all different backgrounds. So some of them are ecologists or botanists, or they work in land management as land stewards, but others are baristas and computer coders and artists from around the region who've been living with catastrophic wildfire for the last 5 years and are really feeling ready to change their relationship with fire. And so they're inspired to come out, get training, learn about the reasons fire is necessary in these ecosystems, so that it's not this monster in their head that they're facing every summer, and rather just kind of flip that whole story on its head and be an active part of the solution in living with fire. So we now have what's called a Prescribed Burn Association in this region, and that's essentially a community of neighbors helping neighbors to get good fire on the ground. And my program, Fire Forward, has been training and building capacity for that Prescribed Burn Association of community members around the region to be able to get those good fires to happen and do them safely and effectively and with good leadership, and with the ability to continue building skill sets and knowledge in this group. So we're kind of entering a second round of what this looks like now. We're continuing to organize community, but in many ways it's self-organizing now. We've got, I think, 600 people from around this region who've been trained as basic wildland firefighters through our program. Some of them are working now on squad leadership abilities or other types of leadership. So we're starting to build people into leadership positions. And just this week are actually launching a program that will be developing people into leadership positions. So it's a fellowship program to help people build that, as well as launching an internship program this fall to really intensively build up some newer workforce in this field. And then we're now actually encouraging people from around this region to develop their own equipment caches. So we have landowners all over this area that know how to wield the chainsaw safely and effectively, and when is the right time to do that, how should they go about it. And we're basically trying to train neighborhoods to know how and when to make use of these really low risk windows to put prescribed fire on the ground on their own property. So we've started saying, you know, these landowners should have not just a chainsaw, but also a drip torch and a backpack pump, and know how to use those safely and effectively, especially nowadays with climate change. There's this little tiny silver lining in the tragedy that is climate change that we're facing. And that's that we're actually getting a lot more low risk prescribed burn windows through the middle of the winter season. We have areas in this region that are so heavily fuel loaded from so many years without prescribed fire and without fire consuming those fuels in the understory, that you can go out during a rainstorm with a drip torch and burn off the understory of these forests. Our redwoods and our mixed evergreen forests can be burned pretty much at any time of the year these days. And so we're training people to make use of those winter windows, to get out there as a community with their neighborhood of folks who've been trained and have been participating in this work, to get good fire on the ground and reduce those fuels in a really low risk and low complexity environment. So that's all I've got for you. I'll kick it back to the hosts. Thank you. Stop my share.
Thank you, Shauna, Sam, and Sasha for 3 really great presentations. And you gave a really interesting and great overview of all the different levels of fire management in the United States. So thank you for that. So now we will move on to some questions from the audience. And I'd like to remind everyone that if you have a question that you've not yet submitted, there's still time to put it in the Q&A chat box. And so feel free to keep doing that. So for the first question, I'm wondering, Sasha, how like the Fire Forward organization sounds really great and like it's being really successful, but I wonder how easy it is for people to just get out and practice prescribed burns. I know Sam mentioned that there's some concerns for the smoke impacts and how you guys go around those restrictions.
Yeah, so we actually have been working really closely with the fire agencies and the air quality management agencies. And what's been really incredible in the last 5 years, and kind of to echo what Sam said, we've really seen the public galvanize around the need for prescribed fire as a solution to living with fire because of all of these tragic wildfires that have happened lately. And so people are so sick of breathing this nasty, toxic, dense wildfire smoke that has a bunch of particulate matter from houses burning in it and cars, all of that, that we've actually had very little resistance to smoke from prescribed fire. And that includes from the air quality management districts. They've actually been promoting the message that we need more prescribed fire on the ground across this region and to the public in support of prescribed fire, so that the public, the air quality management district, and ourselves on the prescribed fire side are all on the same page. A little bit of prescribed fire smoke is way better than a mother load of really terrible wildfire smoke.
If I may add to that, so part of it is working with smoke agencies. They're really good at giving us a heads up when the weather or environmental factors are good for smoke dispersion, but also alerting the public of why the smoke is in the sky. So we do a lot of advertising, doing a bit of work ahead of time, educating the public on whatever project it is that either were burning or attempting to burn. So they're aware, and it's not just a wildfire that they need to be worried about.
If I would add on to that real quick. So the project I mentioned in my presentation about the nice 40 acres, right adjacent and in the town of Durango, we're going to start about 1 month ahead of when we have a time that will be weather dependent on burning it, and really advocating and presenting and talking to the public so that they know that when we do burn that, they may have smoke down in that valley because it's going to come into the Durango Valley for about 4 days, but it'll be better than the fire we had here in 2018 in Durango that we had smoke for a couple months. So a lot of public awareness and education.
Great. That's great to hear the change in public perception, but also from agencies themselves. And another question for Shauna. You mentioned the National Fire Management Strategy and the National Fire Plan, and how much of that is legally binding sort of strategies and prescriptions, or is that just kind of a suggestion for the agencies to take on?
It's pretty much a strategy for the agencies to take on and have that same type of prescription for all the agencies, like what Sasha is talking about fits into the National Cohesive Strategy, right? So when after 2000 and the fire plan came out, we knew we needed more people. And then the Cohesive Strategy came out, so we wanted to be able to get all local, state, private, federal together, because all of those agencies, federal, state, private, local, tribal, have different authorities that say go or no go for fires, right? Like some areas in the state government maybe, or local government maybe suppress every fire that starts, right? And then on the federal agencies, there may be different types of management for fires that are lightning caused or fires that are human caused. So the Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy tried to, and is doing, bringing everybody across America, United States, to have something as an anchor point, if you will, to really focus on that and have a common language for sharing that to the public.
If I may add to that, with Shauna, the National Fire Plan, there's a lot of signatories to that, and it tears down to the state in response, how we share our responses, how we collaborate in our responses, and whatnot. Where the cohesive strategy is the how we need to collaborate and what we need to collaborate with at a stewardship level. So it's not necessarily, it's not a law, but we all follow it as a requirement because we're all signatory to it.
Great, that sounds really useful, especially in the United States, as there are so many different levels of management and diverse regions. So it looks like these are all the questions that we have for this webinar. If anybody does have any other questions they'd like to put in the chat, feel free, as there are still a few minutes left. In the meantime, I wanted to thank everyone for joining. Thanks all of our speakers, Shauna Legarza, Sam Marouk, and Sasha Berleman, for your great presentations. And we have one more question. Bethany, go for it.
Yeah, I just thank you all so much for your presentations today. It's wonderful to have that sort of national, state, and local perspective come together. And I wanted to ask each of you if you could identify sort of the ideal end state for fire management from your perspective, and perhaps the one most impactful step that we could take in the fire world to achieve that end state.
Sure, I could go first. I don't think there's ever an end state. I think that we have to get our entries in and continue to sustain and maintain into the future for a healthy life for future generations.
I would agree with Shauna that not necessarily an end state, but an environment where there's a complete understanding of the effects that the environment we have around us has on our daily lives. And I know there's a lot of committed folks out there that whether they're agency folks belonging to various responsible agencies or in the public, but I think we're getting better at helping the public at large, at least in the United States, understand the why. How, as Sasha explained, fire is a part of the ecosystem, whether we like it or not. We used to educate folks that fire was bad. Fire is not necessarily bad if it's the right kind of fire. So that's what all our efforts are, is to have the right kind of fire on the ground for the right reasons. And so it's not big and scary, and it's healthy for our ecosystem at large.
I think that, yeah, again, not an end state, but I think there are some things that would help us know that we've made it or come close. And I think one of those would be spending as much money on prescribed fire and fuels reduction as we do on fire suppression. That would be a pretty good indicator. And then having as much capacity for prescribed burning. So having as much equipment and engines and resources, people dedicated to the prescribed fire and fuels reduction effort, having, just like having a matching or equivalent size and skill level workforce, and the equipment needed to support that workforce and the funding needed to support that workforce. In the prevention fire management side, prescribed burning fuels reduction, as we do for suppression, I think that would be a great indicator that like we've turned a corner and we're living in a better way with fire.
Thank you. Those are all great answers. And we have one more question from Judith Kirschner. She thanks everyone for the really interesting presentations. And her question is for Sasha. She really liked hearing how you started the community-based fire management in the Fire Forward initiative. In practical terms, what would be the first steps to take if you are to start such an initiative in a fire-adapted or fire-prone area where people forgot about fires, or fires have been banned for more than 100 years? And who do you think should take leadership in such an initiative? Does it need an external agency to coordinate between rescue service, air quality locals, and etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in California, we've been having many pockets of this type of model popping up across the state over the last 2 years. And I think what works well is gathering a committee of people who are like Sam or like Shauna, who have a ton of experience in fire management, along with some people who are retired from local fire, maybe maybe a tribal elder who has some local knowledge, maybe someone who represents the ranching community and has been burning as part of their ranching family for 100 years, maybe. Having a little bit of representation from all of those groups as a collaborative committee to plan out how we can make change, and then going for some funding and gathering some momentum around it. I do think it is set our area apart that we have an actual nonprofit committed to doing this work, with funding committed to that as well. In some of the other areas where it's just been Prescribed Burn Association being led by a committee with no dedicated like staff or funding for that, it's harder to get things to actually happen. There's a lot of great momentum, but a lack of ability to follow through with significant performance or implementation. So having both of those seems to make a really big difference. Having both a dedicated nonprofit that's coordinating between all these agencies and the public and different stakeholders, as well as having a just community collaborative team that is working to get things done, seems to be really effective.
That's great advice. Thank you. So it looks like there are no more questions, and we're getting closer to the end time of this webinar. So again, I would like to thank all the speakers for your really great presentations and reflections. And thank you all the participants who joined today. We hope you enjoyed the presentations, and keep an eye out for the video recording and the summary blog that will be posted and shared. And make sure to share it with whoever you think might be interested in this topic. We also would like to let everyone know that the PyroLife Living with Fire webinar series is going to take a break in the next 2 months for July and August, and we'll be back in September with monthly webinars on fire management.